Hi and welcome. Let's talk about hope this week. I think we need a bit of hope, don't you? Coronavirus is causing such suffering around the world, such destitution. It's a horrible thing. And we need some hope in the mix. And I believe that hope mobilizes us and enables us to find solutions and address issues. My view is, by the way, that the early advice given to countries still holds. Test, test, test. We all want to get busy fixing, but unless you have the scientific information, you won't get the right answers, will you? You'll be judging too many things in the dark. You'll be making it up as you go along, however well intentioned you are. So the scientific advice is critical, and we're always being reassured by political leaders that they're following the advice of science. Well, excellent if we are, but we do need to make sure we are properly invested in getting the quality information by the scientific methods in the first place, and then we are very serious about following it. There is a problem with that methodology left to itself. It's this: Hitler followed that methodology. He was completely satisfied that his doctrines were supported by science. Now, several things have happened since Hitler's day. One is we've had several decades of science which has shown that what he trusted as scientifically dependable was completely nonsense and not grounded in the facts at all. We got much better science now because science is in progress. So, just as we are finding out some important things about coronavirus now, hopefully 20 years' time we'll have progressed a long way on current knowledge. So for Hitler, he referenced the science. He concluded that black lives don't matter. In fact, along with a whole other heaps of lives, they're best disposed of. And the horrible doctrines that Hitler put forward and drew people into claimed to be scientifically based. But the science was imperfect and the interpretation was a little biased too. So believe as I do, and I do passionately, in the importance of attending to the science. We need a little bit more than just the science. We need something the Bible calls wisdom, because we will never have complete information. So we will have to make good judgment. Wisdom is judgment, a capacity to make good judgment that is deeply and profoundly based in a good understanding of life and its purpose and its many dynamics. And in addition to the wisdom, we will need to know where to place our hope, because it is hope that will motivate us to address issues. Without hope, people despair and give up. It's horrible to be without hope. Who would want to be in lockdown without hoping that one day things are going to get better? Hope mobilizes, hope lifts the spirit and enables. Hope is good for your health. Hope is essential to human functioning. And with that in mind, I would like to turn our attention to these four parables from Matthew chapter 13. Sometimes Jesus, in trying to draw us into a better grasp of what he meant by the kingdom of heaven, and I'm going to say more about it later on, the kingdom of God, sometimes he used pairs of parables or sets of parables so that you could look at the same truth from more than one angle. So I've chosen for today these two pairs of parables, each of which gives you a snapshot into something about the kingdom seen from two different points of view. So in the first pair of parables, it's an activity typical to a man and an activity typical to a woman in their culture. And the second pair of parables are both men, but one is a 0 hours contract worker and the other moves among the wealth. So each will give us a slightly different take and draw us deeper into the meaning of the kingdom. Remember, if you've been following these video presentations on a Sunday, what I said last week is that Jesus may surprise us when he says that he didn't tell parables to make it simpler to understand his meanings. And that's a bit of a surprise because we tend to think, well, a parable must be an illustration to make it easier. And occasionally his parables did do that. But more, his parables tease. They play a game, they draw us into a game. Read any book, any fiction book, and you don't know the rules at the beginning of the book. Watch any film, fiction film. You don't know the rules at the beginning of the film. You learn the rules as you go through, and you go, so why did you write this book? Why did you make this movie? I think the theme is this. I think the meaning is that. I think they're trying to say this thing about life or whatever. Or they're just trying to entertain us or whatever it is. But you don't know the rules until you're in it and you discover them as you go. That's the way that parables work. So we have 4 parables to look at, but they're very short, so it doesn't take very long. They come in 2 pairs. First pair of parables. There was a man who planted a tiny seed. The mustard seed is not the one used in Britain and northern climes, but the mustard tree, it's like a shrub that can grow tree-sized. And yet the seed is very, very tiny, a sort of grain of sand and smaller. So this man planted the seed in the vastness of the soil, and the seed became the tree he intended it to. A woman took a small amount of leaven, that's the bit that holds the yeast in it, and she put it into about 20 kilos of dough, if you like old money, 50 pounds of dough. And sure enough, it did its work. And all that dough was completely transformed by that small amount of flour, and it became bread enough to feed well over 100 people, a very hearty amount. So that's the first pair of parables that if you didn't know, you might think there's no way a big tree could come out of that small seed. But you know how seeds work. So you can trust that this is what happened. The story has meaning. If you didn't know, you might doubt that putting that amount of leaven into that vast amount of dough would have that outcome. But in fact, that's an everyday experience for people. So you do know that that's likely to have worked. Well, it did work. And then the second pair of parables. Well, let's come to the second pair of parables in a moment. I think let's pause on the first pair and just notice that they're about not mistaking the small beginning for something insignificant. That in fact, that tiny seed planted in the vastness of the soil, it became a tree. Jesus is saying, what I'm doing now may look pretty insignificant to you. I've only got a handful of disciples. I'm just wandering around a small country preaching and teaching and healing and delivering. It's quite a small event, but it's earth-changing and it's eternity-changing too. Do not underestimate it. Just as you know that the tree was once a seed, so know that the kingdom of heaven, which will one day be everything, is right now a small beginning in your country, in your time, amongst you, as I move around and share the good news from God. And just as the small amount of leaven transforms the vast amount of dough and real bread and gorgeous bread is made, so know that the outcome of this will be transformational, epically, far more than you might be at risk of imagining right now. Do not underestimate what is happening as I, Jesus, teach the business of the kingdom of heaven. The second pair of parables are also about the nature of the kingdom of heaven and drawing us into it. They draw us a little deeper, actually, because these two parables are not spoken to the crowd who just turn up to listen to Jesus. These, Matthew tells us, are spoken to the disciples. And they're the people who don't just turn up to listen to Jesus. They're the people who buy into what Jesus is sharing. They're the people who invest themselves in following Jesus. They're the people who get involved in the business of the kingdom, not just think about what it might mean. The two parables, remember, there's the 0 hours contract worker digging up somebody else's field, hits the treasure, sells everything he has because he's so excited and he's so on fire by what's happened. Or very similar scene, but now in the places of wealth. A merchant dealing in luxury items is looking for the day he can clinch the big deal. And sure enough, it happened. He's willing to sell absolutely everything because of the worth of this deal. And so the first pair of parables tells the public, do not underestimate. This changes everything. And the second pair of parables tells the disciples, you are smart to invest yourselves in this. It's unbelievably valuable. The kingdom of heaven is an idea that we can struggle with because it's not a key idea in our culture. But in Jesus's culture, it was a key idea. What I mean by a key idea in a culture is this. Every culture has key ideas that it talks about, where people can talk about it without necessarily ever defining what they mean. So an example I draw from our culture would be democracy. Democracy is a key idea to all Western cultures and to many other cultures in the world as well. It's a key idea. We love it. We don't really, most of us, know how to explain it in any detail. We're a bit vague, actually, most of us, on the details, but we'll fight for it, we'll die for it. We believe that everybody should have it. It's a key idea, and you don't need to explain it, you just talk about it. But you'll have a different idea, perhaps, than somebody else as to exactly what it means. Well, the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, in Jesus' culture was a key idea, like democracy is to ours. For them, it was the stuff that you talked about at the bus stop. Everybody sort of knew what you meant. There was disagreement on detail, but everybody basically bought into it. And the basic concept was that our country needs to kick out the Romans and we need to dominate, because when we dominate, then God's ways are brought into earth and start to dominate too. So we don't just call it our kingdom, it's actually God's kingdom. And they were onto a thing, but they were missing the thing itself. And Jesus was keen to say to them, the kingdom of heaven is the big idea, but you haven't got the hold of it yet. The kingdom of heaven isn't just good news to liberate one country so it can dominate others. The kingdom of heaven is about the release of the love of God upon the earth, and that's what I'm trying to do here amongst you. The kingdom of heaven is something you need to rethink, and you need to let me help you understand what it is. So the kingdom of heaven is something you guys are underestimating, and you other guys who haven't underestimated but have committed yourself to it, you've chosen something of true value, and it really will transform and change absolutely everything. And Jesus set the parables, all four of them, in the past. He wasn't saying the kingdom of heaven is like if you plant a seed, it might grow into a tree. If you put leaven into bread, it might. No, he said, this is what happened. A man got a tree. How did he get a tree? Well, he planted a little seed. Remember? You know that you can do that. Well, a woman got a whole batch of bread for over 100 people. How did she do it? Well, she started with a with a tiny bit of leaven in the great amount of dough. And how did a person take hold of the treasure they discovered and the deal that they could make? By just saying it's worth absolutely everything. I've been trying to share with you in this presentation the thing I really hope in. See, I value so many things in life, but I really hope in the kingdom of God, taught by Jesus, shared by Jesus, and brought in by Jesus. I think he set these parables in the past to say that's what happened, to make it perfectly clear. The outcome is not in doubt. The question is, are you going to estimate it aright? And are you going to get involved? I hope you will, because our world really is in need of hope. And if we'll get involved in sharing the love of God that Christ came to give us, then that hope will indeed be transformational. God bless you. Have a good and safe week.